308 feet below the surface of the Atlantic, a shape appears on a sonar screen that stops a research team cold. Angular, deliberate, not natural. The kind of outline that has haunted maritime historians for 8 decades. And within hours, a claim begins spreading across the internet with the speed and certainty of confirmed history that divers have finally opened the captain's cabin of Adolf Hitler's personal U-boat, and what they found inside is rewriting everything we thought we knew about the final days of the Second World War. There is only one problem: the story is not true, and the real history, the documented, verified, deeply human story of what actually happened to U-977, is more extraordinary, more morally complex, and more historically consequential than any manufactured mystery could ever be. This is the story the archives actually tell. In the spring of 1945, the war in Europe was collapsing at a rate that stunned even those living through it. Adolf Hitler was dead. Berlin was burning. The 1,000-year Reich had lasted 12 years and left a continent in rubble. German military commanders were issuing surrender orders to units that had, in many cases, already been destroyed. But in the Norwegian port of Kristiansand, on the night of May 2, 1945, one day after the German surrender announcement had been broadcast across the Reich, a single Type 6C submarine slipped beneath the surface of a cold, dark fjord and disappeared. Its designation was U-977. Its commanding officer was Oberleutnant zur See Heinz Schäffer, a 24-year-old lieutenant junior grade, who had assumed command of the vessel in the final months of the war. The crew numbered in the mid-40s. The boat had been fitted with a Schnorchel device in February of that year, a breathing tube that allowed the diesel engines to run while submerged, pulling fresh air from just below the surface and exhausting fumes at a depth where Allied aircraft could not easily detect the wake. It was this device, perhaps more than any other piece of engineering, that made what came next physically possible. What came next was 66 days submerged, nearly 107 days at sea in total, a transatlantic voyage covering 7,644 sea miles, navigated without surfacing in open water, running the Schnorchel for 3 to 4 hours each night in darkness, pressing southward along the Norwegian coast, then west into the deep Atlantic, then south toward the equator, then further still, past waters where Allied patrols had hunted U-boats for years, until the submarine emerged off the coast of Argentina on August 17, 1945. 3 months after the war ended, a German submarine surfaced at Mar del Plata and surrendered. The world had not seen U-977 for 107 days. In the vacuum left by that silence, a mythology had already begun to form. But let us stay for a moment with what actually happened aboard that vessel, because it is a story that has never fully received the weight it deserves. When Schäffer brought U-977 into Kristiansand in the final days of April 1945, he was faced with a decision that no military training manual could have prepared him for. The war was functionally over. The official surrender order had either just been issued or was imminent. His men had families. Some had wives and children in Germany. Some had heard the Allied radio broadcasts warning that German soldiers would face imprisonment, forced labor, and worse. Some of those broadcasts were propaganda. Some were not entirely false, given what had happened to German prisoners in France after the First World War. Schäffer later wrote that the fear among his crew was genuine, rooted not in cowardice but in the lived memory of what post-war occupation had meant for the previous generation. He offered his men a choice. 16 crew members who wished to return to their families in Germany were put ashore from dinghies near the Norwegian coast. 8 days after U-977 had departed Kristiansand, they were allowed to leave. They were not forced into anything. The remaining crew, the men who stayed, made the crossing willingly, under a commanding officer who had decided that surrender to Argentine authorities offered better prospects than what awaited them under Allied occupation in Europe. Whether that calculation was correct is a moral and historical question that historians are still debating. But the human texture of that moment, a young officer in a collapsing empire, making a decision about the lives of his men at the bottom of the world, is precisely the kind of story that gets lost when myth displaces documentation. The crossing itself was one of the most technically demanding submarine voyages of the entire war, and it happened after the war was over. The Type 6C was not designed for sustained submerged transatlantic passages. It displaced approximately 769 tons, Its two Germania-Werft diesel engines were powerful enough for surface runs and sprint dives, but they were not built for endurance beneath the Atlantic in high summer. The Schnorchel allowed the boat to breathe without surfacing, but it was a crude device. Noisy, prone to flooding at the wrong wave height, dependent on sea conditions that changed without warning. Using it for 3 to 4 hours each night, in darkness, while navigating by dead reckoning across thousands of miles of open ocean, required a level of seamanship that bordered on the extraordinary. The observation periscope had already been damaged on May 7th, left extended during a dive, bent by water pressure, rendering the boat partially blind. The torpedoes had been expended. Fuel was critically low by the time they reached Argentine waters. When U-977 finally surfaced off Mar del Plata, it was running on margins that left almost no room for error, and yet they made it. When Argentine naval authorities came aboard on August 17th, what they found was a standard Type 6C submarine in a state consistent with a long ocean passage. Provisions depleted, fuel nearly exhausted, equipment worn, no unusual cargo, no sealed compartments containing historical artifacts, no evidence of passengers, fugitives, or classified materials. The standard inventory of a working military vessel that had been at sea for over 3 months. This is not speculation. It is documented in the formal interrogation report filed by Allied intelligence officers, available in the U-boat archive, corroborated by Argentine naval records, and consistent with every authoritative account of the surrender that has since been published. Schäffer himself addressed this directly in his 1952 memoir, published in German as U-977, 66, Tage unter Wasser, 66 days underwater, and in English translation the following year, he wrote that by the early 1950s, the mystery surrounding his voyage had already generated so much comment, so many stories, so many invented details that he felt compelled to set the record straight in his own words. He was not writing to defend himself. He was writing because the mythology had already escaped the historical record, and he was the only person alive who had been inside that hull for the entire crossing. His account is detailed, practical, and unremarkable in all the ways that matter. Routine operations, provisions, navigation logs, the anxiety of submerged travel, the discipline required to manage his crew in a steel cylinder for months on end. There are no sealed cabins. There is no hidden cargo. There is no connection to Adolf Hitler, a man who, so far as any documented evidence shows, had never set foot aboard U-977 and had no personal association with the vessel whatsoever. U-977 was commissioned at Blohm & Voss in Hamburg on the 6th of May, 1943. Its original commanding officer was Oberleutnant zur See Hans Leilich. It was assigned to training and Baltic operations. Schäffer took command in the final months of 1944. The idea that this was Hitler's personal submarine has no origin in any official document, any crew testimony, any wartime record, or any piece of physical evidence. It originated, as nearly all of these stories do, in the space between what is documented and what people wish to believe. That space is not empty. It is filled with books, rumors, and eventually with YouTube videos. The most persistent version of the U-977 myth connects it to a broader story involving U-530, another German submarine that followed a similar escape route and surrendered to Argentina in July of 1945, 6 weeks before U-977. Both submarines arrived in South America after the German surrender. Both had commanding officers who refused to return to a defeated Europe under Allied occupation. Both became subjects of wild speculation about what or who they might have been carrying. A 1947 book by a writer named Ladislas Jabo gave the story its most dramatic form, suggesting that the two submarines were part of a ghost convoy that had transported Hitler himself, along with senior Nazi officials, to a secret base in Antarctica. No credible evidence has ever been produced to support this claim. It has been investigated, dismissed, and re-investigated so many times that the investigations themselves have become part of the folklore. U-534, a different vessel entirely, eventually made its way to England, where it was preserved and displayed at Birkenhead docks in Merseyside for nearly 2 decades, a physical artifact that people could walk around, examine, and measure against the myths. U-977 was towed to the United States in November of 1945. The United States Navy Board of Inspection and Survey examined it, documented its contents, and found nothing extraordinary. It was then used as a torpedo target and sunk off Cape Cod by USS Atoll in November of 1946. There is no wreck of U-977 awaiting discovery by divers. There is no sealed cabin. There are no artifacts awaiting recovery. The submarine no longer exists as a physical object. What remains is paper, interrogation transcripts, inspection records, disposal documentation, archived in Record Group 24 at the United States National Archives, corroborated by the U-boat archive maintained by historians who have spent decades tracking the movements of more than 1,100 documented German submarine losses. This matters not as a debunking exercise, but as a historical one. The men who served aboard U-977 were real. Their fear was real. Their crossing was real. One of the most audacious open ocean submarine voyages in the documented history of underwater navigation, accomplished on a damaged boat with depleted fuel. After the war it was built to fight had already ended. Heinz Schäffer lived until 1979. He answered the questions put to him by Allied interrogators, wrote his memoir, and spent the post-war decades watching a fiction grow up around the most consequential months of his life. There is a question worth sitting with here, and it is not whether divers found something in a sealed cabin. It is this: why does the myth persist? Why, 8 decades after the end of the Second World War, do we keep reaching for the story where Hitler escaped, where the Nazis smuggled something irreplaceable into the deep, where official history is concealing what actually happened? The documented record is detailed. The primary sources are accessible. The interrogation transcripts are online. Schäffer's memoir has been in print for 70 years. Part of the answer may lie in the nature of the war itself. The Second World War produced outcomes so enormous, so morally definitive, that they seem to demand an equally enormous secret, something hidden beneath the surface that explains not just what happened, but what it meant. The clean ending: Hitler dead in a Berlin bunker, Germany surrendered, the world rebuilt, feels insufficient to the scale of the catastrophe. And so the myths fill the gap. They place Hitler on a submarine. They seal the cabin. They promise that somewhere in the deep, the real ending is still waiting to be found. But there is another U-boat worth knowing, one that sits at the edge of this story and has never quite been resolved. In the waters of the Skagerrak, at a position roughly 9 nautical miles from where Allied bomber crews reported an attack in 1945, the wreck of U-3523 lies at depth. It is a Type 21, Germany's most advanced submarine design, built for sustained submerged operations in ways the Type 8 could only approximate. It was discovered in recent years. It is classified as a war grave. It is unlikely to be fully explored given its depth and the legal protections afforded to vessels that went down with their crews. And because it is real, because it is there, because its manifest and final mission remain only partially documented, it carries with it a weight that no manufactured mystery can replicate. The ocean floor is not a vault for the myths we construct about history. It is a record, and the record, when it is read carefully, when interrogation transcripts are consulted, when disposal documents are followed to their conclusions, when the memoirs of the men who were actually there are given the same weight as the theories built in their absence, tells a story that is harder and stranger and more human than any sealed cabin could contain. U-977 surrendered. Its crew was interviewed. Its hull was inspected. Its contents were inventoried. It was sunk, and the man who commanded it spent the rest of his life explaining, patiently and precisely, what had actually happened below the surface of the Atlantic in the summer of 1945. He told the truth. The question that remains, the one that no archive can fully answer, is why that was never quite enough.